She had been awake since 3 in the morning. Not because of grief exactly, though the grief was there, settled low in her chest like a stone she had been carrying since Tuesday, and had stopped trying to put down. She had been awake because she could not stop thinking about the flag. Leonard had told her 4 months before he died how he wanted it folded. He had been sitting in the recliner by the bedroom window, the one they had bought together at a furniture store in Macon 22 years ago, a recliner that had outlasted 3 remote controls and one of the family cats, and an entire decade of Sunday afternoons. The afternoon light had been coming through the curtains at that low, golden angle that happens in October in Georgia, and Leonard had been feeling relatively well that day, or well enough to talk, which was not always the same thing, but was close enough that she had cherished it. He had walked her through the folding instructions, the way he walked her through everything he considered important, carefully, unhurriedly, with the quiet certainty of a man who believed that information properly shared was a form of respect. He had said 8 folds. He had said the final triangle faces outward when they hand it to you. He had said you want to see the color of the stripes at the base. If you can see the red and the white at the bottom of the triangle, it is right. She had listened to every word. She had not written anything down, because he had not offered to write it down, and she had not wanted to make it feel like a transaction, like something being handed over rather than something being shared. She had held each piece of it in her mind the way she had once held the names of 1,000 children in a school library over 31 years carefully, with the understanding that the names mattered, that you were doing something wrong if you let them go. He had been specific in a way that had moved her, though she had not said so then. He had not just said, "Fold the flag." He had said 8 folds. He had not just said, "Make sure it is right." He had described exactly what right looked like, so that she could verify it herself, so that she would not have to take anyone else's word for it. He had wanted her to be able to look at it and know. That was Leonard not trusting ambiguity when precision was available, not leaving the people he loved to guess when he could tell them. He had finished, and she had nodded, and she had said, "I will remember." He had looked at her for a moment in that way he had the look that contained 40-plus years of knowing someone and finding them still reliable. He had said, "I know you will." That had been October. He had died on a Tuesday in February. 46 years and 4 months of marriage, and the last morning they had together was a Tuesday. And she had been holding his hand, and the window had been dark, and the room had been very quiet. And when the quiet changed in the way it changes when it becomes a different kind of quiet, when you know something has shifted that will not shift back. She had stayed there for a long time before she called anyone. She had sat with his hand in hers, and she had breathed the air of the room that still smelled like him, and she had let herself be in that last moment for as long as she needed to be, because he had deserved that from her, and because she did not know when she would feel him that close again. Now it was Friday. The funeral was at 10 o'clock. It was 6:47 in the morning, and the sky outside the window of her youngest sister Carolyn's house in Harlow County, Georgia, was that pale in-between gray that comes before the sun, decides what kind of morning it is going to be. Miriam Caldwell, 68 years old, retired school librarian, widow of Staff Sergeant Leonard Jerome Caldwell, United States Army, sat at the edge of the guest bed with her hands folded in her lap and looked at the gray through the curtain gap. She was wearing the dark navy dress. She had taken it out of the garment bag she had carried from home the night before and had hung it on the back of the closet door and had looked at it for a long time before she put it on. It was the dress she had worn to their 40th wedding anniversary dinner 6 years ago. A restaurant in Macon, a table by the window, Leonard in the gray suit he wore to every occasion he considered worth a suit, which was not all occasions because he made distinctions. He had looked at her across the table when she sat down, and he had said, "That is still my favorite." She had told him he needed new glasses. He had laughed, and the laugh was the one she loved best, the one that started somewhere in the chest and came out without any performance in it. Unmodulated, the real one, the laugh she'd been listening to for 4 decades and had never gotten tired of. She put the dress on. She did not look in the mirror for long. She sat at the edge of the guest bed and she thought about the flag, and she thought about the cemetery, and she thought about October, and she thought about Tuesday, and she breathed. The morning was gray outside the curtain, and the house was quiet, and somewhere down the hall she could hear her sister moving in the kitchen, the soft sound of a cabinet opening and closing, water running the small courtesies of someone trying not to wake a person they love too early, not knowing that person has been awake for more than 3 hours already. She thought, I am 68 years old and I have been steady through harder things than what today is going to ask of me. She thought that is not entirely true, but I am going to be steady anyway because that is what he would expect. That is what I would expect from myself. They had driven past Pinecrest National Cemetery on their third date in 1978. She had been 20 years old, and Leonard had been 22, and he was already in the Army by then, already through basic training, already walking a little differently than most men his age, not with arrogance, but with a kind of orientation, as though he had decided on a direction, and was moving that way with conviction, and did not expect anyone to redirect him. They had been driving back from a drive-in movie in a county she could no longer name. She remembered the film only as something with car chases that she had not paid attention to because she had been paying attention to Leonard, and they had passed Pinecrest on the 2-lane road that curves along the eastern edge of Harlow County, and Leonard had gone quiet. She had noticed the quiet because it was different from his regular quiet, which was comfortable and had already become comfortable in only 3 dates, which itself had told her something. This was the quiet of a person having a thought they were deciding whether to say out loud. He had said without preamble, I would like to be buried there one day. She had turned to look at him. He had kept his eyes on the road. He had said, I just like the way it is kept. You can see it from here, even in the dark, how straight the rows are. Something about that. She had thought this is an odd thing for a 22-year-old to say on a third date. She had also thought in the same breath almost simultaneously, I am going to marry this man. It had taken him 4 years to ask. She had waited not without impatience, but without doubt. She had never doubted. That had been among the first things she had known about Leonard Caldwell, and it turned out to be true all the way through. Now, 48 years after that drive, she was going to take him to those straight rows. She was going to stand there in the dress he loved, and she was going to watch them fold the flag the way he had described, and she was going to receive it, and she was going to be steady. Not because being steady was easy. Nothing about today was easy, but because steady was what she had learned, and the learning had been long, and it held. Marcus knocked on the door at 7:15. Her son. 44 years old, his father's shoulders, his father's quiet voice, the same low register, the same habit of pausing before he spoke because he had learned growing up with Leonard Caldwell for a father that words said carefully were worth more than words said fast. He said her name through the door. He said it was time to get ready. She said, I am ready. He opened the door and looked at her, at the dress, at her hands in her lap, at her face, and he had been crying at some point in the night or the early morning. She could tell from the slight puffiness around his eyes that he had tried to manage with cold water and had not entirely succeeded. He did not say anything about the crying, and neither did she. She stood up and picked up her purse and walked to him and put her hand on his arm for a moment, just her hand on his arm, and he covered her hand with his large hand, and they stood there for 2 seconds before she moved. Renee was in the hallway, 41 years old, driven up from Savannah the evening before with red eyes she kept attributing to her sinuses and that nobody believed were sinuses. She hugged her mother and held on for 2 extra seconds, which was exactly what she had always done, even at 7 years old, coming back from summer camp, even at 17, when she was trying to be someone who did not need extra seconds in a hug. Miriam held her back and felt the solidity of her daughter, and thought, we are still here, both of us. We are on the other side of something enormous, and we are still here. Renee released her and straightened and wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand in a gesture she had clearly been making for 3 days. She said, you look beautiful, Mama. Miriam said, I know. It was his favorite. Something in Renee's expression shifted, moved through, and she nodded. They drove to the funeral home on Cartwright Road. The morning was cool, the February air still carrying its edge, and the roads through Harlow County were quiet. At that hour, the county highway mostly empty, a few trucks from the farm operations to the south moving past in the other direction. The trees along the road were still bare from winter, the branches holding the gray sky without apology, just beginning to think about the business of leaves. She sat in the back seat of Marcus's car and held her purse with both hands and watched the trees go past and let herself be carried. The smell of the car's cedar air freshener, the same one Marcus had used for 20 years, was so familiar and so ordinary that it created for a moment the sensation that they were simply driving somewhere going to dinner, or a church event or a family occasion. Then the hearse came into view in the funeral home parking lot, and the sensation passed. The hearse was long and black and very still in the morning light. Behind it, in a line, were the family vehicles, her sister Louise's sedan, her cousin, Dwayne's SUV, 2 more cars from the congregation. And behind all of those, parked at the edge of the lot near the tree line, was a dark green van with a government license plate and the formal markings of the United States Army. Beside the van stood 8 soldiers. She stopped walking when she saw them. She had known they would be there. The Army had arranged the full military honors burial, had been coordinating with Garrett at the funeral home for 3 weeks. Calls and paperwork and logistics. Everything handled, but knowing it and seeing it were not the same thing. The dress uniforms, the white gloves, the stillness of 8 people who had come to this parking lot on a February morning in Harlow County, Georgia, prepared and ready, having dressed and checked each other, and rehearsed and done everything that needed to be done so that they could stand here and mean what their presence was meant to mean. She breathed. She kept walking. One of the soldiers stepped forward from the line when she approached. He was tall, 6 feet or a little over broad through the shoulders, with a face that had the quality of someone who had moved through hard things without letting the hard things harden them. 38 years old. He introduced himself, Staff Sergeant Dwayne Hopper, United States Army. He said, "It is an honor to be here this morning, ma'am." She looked at him, and she said, "Leonard talked about those years. He talked about the men he served with. He said he was a good man to serve beside. One of the best I have known. When the assignment came through, when I saw his name, I requested it personally. I wanted to be the one to see him home." She looked at him. She said, "Thank you for that. That means a great deal." He said, "We are going to take care of him, ma'am. We are going to do it right." She believed him. She could not have said precisely why that particular statement, stated plainly without flourish from a man who had served with her husband in the 90s and had held on to that memory long enough to request this assignment when the time came, was the thing that finally made her eyes sting. Not the hearse, not the uniforms, not even Marcus and Renee standing together by the car with their fathers' faces. But this. The fact of a man choosing to be here. Choosing specifically this. She blinked. She straightened. She thanked him again and turned to speak with Garrett about the route. The procession formed at 8:45. 9 vehicles in order. Marcus's car at the front, Renee and Louise in the second car, the other family cars in sequence, the hearse and the honor guard van at the rear. Garrett walked the route one final time with Marcus. Perimeter Road to the main entrance of Pinecrest National Cemetery. 14 minutes at a respectful driving pace. They were leaving at 8:50. They had a 10 o'clock commitment. Everything was arranged. Everything had been arranged for 3 weeks. She settled into the back seat of Marcus's car. She held her purse. The morning outside the window was still pale, but the gray had taken on the faint warmth that means the sun is deciding. She watched Harlow County go past the gas station at the corner of Route 9 and Cartwright, where Leonard had always stopped for sweet tea, the old church her grandmother had attended, the stand of pines that marked the edge of the county fairgrounds where she and Leonard had taken the children every October for a decade. All of it still here. All of it continuing. She thought about the flag, 8 folds, final triangle facing outward, red and white visible at the base. She would remember. She had always remembered things that Leonard gave her to hold. She thought about the school library. She thought about 31 years of children coming through those doors, the ones who needed quiet and found it there, the ones who came in not knowing what they needed and left with a book pressed into their hands because she had watched them and understood. She had kept all their names. First names, last names, the grades they had been in, sometimes the exact book she had put in their hands, and why. A memory built for holding what matters to people. Leonard had known that about her from early on. He had trusted her with things, the household accounts, the children's schedules, his own particular way of arranging the tools under the porch overhang, because he had understood that she held things carefully, that she did not let them go. She was not going to let the flag instructions go. Not today, not ever. Perimeter Road came into view at 9:32. The sky had resolved into clear pale blue, with the low, honest light of a February morning that has decided to be kind. Leonard had always said the light before noon was honest. He said everything after noon was negotiating with shadows. The cemetery gates were visible ahead, white stone columns at the main entrance. The wrought iron opened the rows of white markers beyond the fence, visible even from 300 yards straight and regular, exactly as a 22-year-old had described them from a car window in the dark. And then Marcus slowed. Miriam leaned forward and saw the police cruiser parked sideways across the road, its nose pulled toward the shoulder, blocking the lane. A single officer stood in front of it with his right hand raised palm flat, a gesture that said, "Stop," in every language. Marcus brought the car to a stop. She looked at the officer. She looked at the gate ahead. She looked at the clock on the dashboard. 9:33. 27 minutes. She thought, there is time. This will be resolved. Be still. There is time. She sat back. She was still. The officer walked toward them with the measured pace of someone who wants it understood that the pace is his to set. He was young, 34, she would learn, though he looked it before she knew it with the name Frey on his tag. Not a large man, but he held himself with the particular deliberateness of someone who has practiced believing that authority is a thing you can wear. He reached Marcus's window and leaned in with his forearm resting on the top of the doorframe. He said, "I need to see the escort clearance permit for this procession." Marcus said with patience that they were a military funeral procession proceeding to Pinecrest National Cemetery for a 10 o'clock burial service for a man who had served 26 years in the United States Army. Frey said he understood that. He said Perimeter Road required a specific county escort clearance permit for any vehicle procession of more than 5 cars. He said it was procedure. Marcus said the funeral home had handled all of the paperwork. He reached for the glove compartment and produced the manila folder with the funeral home letterhead, the authorization from the county, the signed documentation, the name of the deceased, the date and time and route. He passed it through the window. Frey took it. He opened it. He read. Miriam watched from the back seat. She watched the way he read carefully, not quickly, with the posture of someone who is looking for something specific and has not yet found it, or has found it and is deciding whether to acknowledge it. He closed the folder. He said, "This is the funeral home documentation. I see it, but it does not include the specific county escort clearance permit for Perimeter Road. This is a different document. The permit is a county road classification instrument, and it is a separate requirement." She thought Leonard had a name for this. He called it map confusion, using the procedure as though it were the purpose, as though the reason the road classification existed had nothing to do with what was actually happening on the road. Marcus said, "What specific permit?" Frey said the county has an access protocol for Perimeter Road for processions of more than 5 vehicles. Without the county permit, I cannot clear the main entrance. There is a back entrance on the south side of the cemetery 2 miles east and then north on Cemetery Ridge Road. I would recommend beginning that detour now to make your 10 o'clock. Renee said quietly from the passenger seat, "The back entrance is 2 miles around. We will miss our slot." Frey did not look at Renee. He addressed Marcus and said the back entrance would access the cemetery and there was still time if they moved promptly. He said the back entrance was not a lesser option. Marcus looked at him. He said 2 miles is not a lesser distance at a funeral pace. 2 miles is the difference between arriving on time and missing the slot. We have coordinated this burial for 3 weeks with the United States Army. The route was confirmed. What we need is for you to clear this road. Frey said what you need and what the protocol requires are 2 different things. The protocol requires the permit. He said it with the finality of a man who believed that the last word in an argument was determined by who had the authority to say it. Renee, from her position by the front bumper, said quietly, "His flag is in that hearse." Nobody responded to that. The words went into the morning air and stayed there. Miriam counted in that moment how many times he had said the word remains. 3 times since they had stopped. The remains in the hearse. The transport of the remains. The scheduling of the remains transfer. He had not said it with malice. She did not think he was a malicious man exactly. She thought he was a man who had encountered this vocabulary in a protocol document and had adopted it because it seemed official and because official felt safe to him. But she was 10 feet from the hearse. She was 10 feet from Leonard. And every time Frey said remains, she felt something in her settle and harden, not into anger, but into resolve, the way a wall settles when it has decided it is not going to move. She opened her door. She stepped out onto Perimeter Road, and the morning air came around her cool and clean, carrying the smell of red clay and cut grass and the faint mineral smell of the road surface warming in the light. She stood beside the car, and she straightened, and she walked around the front of Marcus's car, and she stepped onto the center line of Perimeter Road in her dark navy dress and her low heels, and she looked at Officer Dennis Frey. She said his name is Leonard. Leonard Jerome Caldwell. Staff Sergeant, United States Army. 26 years of service. He is in that hearse behind us. The military arranged this burial. The Army coordinated this route. We have a 10 o'clock appointment and we are going through that gate. Frey looked at her. Something recalibrated in his expression, not softness, but a recognition that the geometry of the situation had changed. He said, "Ma'am, I understand your loss and I respect your husband's service. I am not trying to cause difficulty here. But I have a protocol I am required to follow, and I cannot clear this entrance without the county permit. I need you to return to your vehicle." She said, "You keep calling him the remains." He said, "Ma'am." She said, "His name is Leonard." Frey walked toward her. Not toward the car, not toward Marcus, toward her with the measured stride of someone intending to demonstrate that the distance between them is his to manage. He stopped 3 feet from her. He was substantially taller, and he was in uniform on his road, and he had a radio and a badge and a cruiser blocking the way, and none of it moved her. She stood on the center line and looked at him. She thought, "I am 68 years old, and I buried a husband 3 days ago, and I drove across Harlow County in his favorite dress, and I am standing on this road in the morning light, and there is nothing you have that I am afraid of." She thought Leonard would say, "I have already won this." He would say, "You do not need to do anything else. Just stand there, Miriam. You have already made the argument that matters. Now just stand." She stood. Marcus had gotten out of the car. He came around and took a position beside his mother, not between her and Frey, just beside her, large and steady, with his hands in his coat pockets. He looked at Frey, and his voice was controlled and direct when he said, "Can you call your supervisor and ask them to confirm this permit requirement exists and applies to military funeral processions with Army authorization?" Frey said he could make that call and would. He said that in the meantime the procession needed to hold its position or begin the detour because the 10 o'clock time did not change the clearance requirements he was working from. Marcus said, "What is the county ordinance number for this permit requirement?" Frey said he did not have that information on his person. Marcus said, "Can you pull it up on your cruiser's terminal?" Frey said that would take time they did not have. Marcus said, "We do not have time for the back entrance either." Renee had gotten out of the passenger side and stood near the front bumper with her arms crossed. Louise was visible in the window of the second car, looking forward, her face carefully still. All the family cars were stopped. The hearse was stopped. And at the rear of the procession, at the back, the honor guard van was stopped too. And all 8 soldiers had stepped out. She had not heard them. She did not know at what precise moment they had come out of the van, whether it was when she stepped out of Marcus's car, or when Frey walked toward her, or at some other moment in the unfolding of it. But they were standing now in the road behind the hearse in a single line. 8 of them dress uniforms, pressed white gloves, faces composed and forward and entirely still watching, with the quality of people who are not passive but have chosen to be still, because their stillness in this moment means something more than motion would. She looked at them for a moment over Frey's shoulder. 8 people in dress uniforms standing in a road in February in Harlow County, Georgia, behind a hearse carrying a staff sergeant they had come specifically to honor. Dwayne Hopper at the right end of the line, standing in the same measured, certain way he had stood in the funeral home parking lot when he had said, "We are going to see him home right." They had gotten up before dawn. They had driven to a funeral home parking lot. They had stood in that parking lot in the cold, and they had prepared, and they had formed up, and they had followed this procession to a gate that was supposed to be open. And now they were standing in a line in the road, watching a county officer call a dispatcher to describe them as non-compliant. 8 men and women who had put on those uniforms this morning because Staff Sergeant Leonard Jerome Caldwell had earned it, because he had served 26 years, and because one of them had served beside him in the 90s and had remembered and had wanted to be here, all of them watching. Frey reached for his radio. He keyed it and said in full radio voice, the voice designed to carry, to be official, to be heard, that he had a non-compliant civilian vehicle procession at the Perimeter Road main entrance approach to Pinecrest National Cemetery. 9 vehicles. No county escort clearance permit on file. He requested confirmation of the back entrance protocol for non-cleared processions. He said the procession was being held at the main gate pending documentation review. Non-compliant. Miriam heard that word, and she added it to the others she was keeping. She did not respond to it. She stood on the center line, and she watched Frey finish his radio call, and she was absolutely steady, the way she had been steady at 3 a.m, thinking about the flag, the way she had been steady holding Leonard's hand on a Tuesday in February, the way she had been steady for 46 years, because it was what she had learned and what she knew and what she did. The 8 soldiers had not moved. They watched. She thought about what it cost to stand the way they were standing. She thought about what it meant that cost 8 people in pressed uniforms. White gloves, faces composed, who had driven here before dawn and stood in this road and were watching a county officer on his radio telling a dispatch operator that a military funeral procession was non-compliant. She thought about what Leonard would have made of that word applied to his own burial procession. She thought he would have been quiet about it the way he was quiet about most injustices. Not silent, but quiet, a particular quiet that meant, I see this. I am recording this. This is not going to stand. She was recording it too. She was keeping every word. The morning air was cool against her face, and the sunlight fell across the road at that angle that happens in February, when the sun is still low, long shadows behind everything, the world still deciding. She could smell the red clay at the road edge and faintly the pine from the tree line to her left, and beneath that barely perceptible but real the cut grass of the cemetery grounds beyond the gate well-maintained straight rows, just as he had said. Frey finished his radio call. He looked at Miriam standing on the center line. He looked at Marcus beside her. He looked at the honor guard in the road behind the hearse. He had the expression of someone who had started something and was now calculating whether the options available to him had changed. They had changed. She could see that he understood they had changed. She could see it in the slight adjustment of his weight, the way his hand lowered from where it had been half raised. He understood at some level that calling dispatch and having all 8 soldiers step out simultaneously, and having a widow in a dress standing on the center line of the road looking at him, that the geometry of this situation was not the geometry he had walked into when he raised his hand at the front car. But he had not found a way to change course yet. That was the problem with a certain kind of authority. It committed you. It made it hard to simply stop and say I was wrong. Because stopping required admitting that you had started something that should not have been started, and that admission had a cost, and he was not yet sure what the cost would be. She had seen this before. Not this exactly, but this shape. a person in a position of authority who has made a decision and is now defending the decision rather than evaluating it. Because evaluating it honestly would require acknowledging an error, and they are not yet ready to acknowledge the error. And so they double down, because doubling down looks like confidence, and confidence feels better than accountability. She had 31 years of experience with children in a school library. She knew the shape of someone who had gone past what they understood and was defending the position out of refusal to admit they were lost. She was patient. She had always been patient. She could stand on this road for the rest of the morning if that was what it took, but she hoped it would not take that long. Dispatch confirmed through the radio that the back entrance protocol was standard for non-cleared processions at the main gate. Frey looked at Miriam. He looked at Marcus. He said, "Dispatch confirms the protocol. I need the procession to begin moving to the back entrance." Marcus said, "We are not doing that." Frey said, "Then we have a problem." Marcus said, "The problem is the permit requirement you cannot show us the ordinance for. The problem is that you stopped a military funeral procession at the gate of a national cemetery and called a radio dispatch." Frey said, "I'm doing my job." Miriam said very quietly, "Then do it correctly." The silence after that held for a moment, and then Staff Sergeant Dwayne Hopper stepped forward from the line. No drama, no announcement. He simply separated from the honor guard line with the calm of someone who has been waiting for the right moment and has identified it. And he walked forward past the honor guard van, past the hearse, past the family cars at the same measured pace he had used in the funeral home parking lot when he first introduced himself. Not slow, not hurried, controlled in the way that real control is quiet. He carried the folder in his left hand. Government tan cover. Army seal centered on the front. A stamp in blue ink at the top edge visible even in the morning light. He walked to where Miriam stood on the center line. He stopped beside her. He looked at her briefly, a look that said, "I have got this, I am here." And she looked back and she nodded once. He turned to face Officer Frey. He said, "Staff Sergeant Dwayne Hopper, United States Army, assigned as Honor Guard Escort Commander for the burial of Sergeant First Class Leonard Jerome Caldwell. I have the official military assignment orders and the route authorization for this procession. I need you to look at them." Frey looked at him. He said, "What is that documentation?" Hopper said, "This is the official Army assignment orders package for this funeral procession. Authorization code Hotel November 47, Delta 29. Military funeral honors authorization issued under Title 10, United States Code Section 5712. Route clearance for main entrance access at Pinecrest National Cemetery is stamped on page 2, date stamped earlier this week, signed by the Army Installation Coordinator and by the Cemetery Director. I am going to read you the relevant section, and then I am going to ask you to read it yourself." He opened the folder. He read from it directly, his voice level and clear. Military funeral processions operating under active Honor Guard escort authorization bearing a valid route clearance stamp are specifically exempt from county and municipal escort permit requirements on access routes designated for National Cemetery approach. This exemption is established in the Installation Coordination Agreement between Harlow County and Pinecrest National Cemetery, effective 2003, and is incorporated by reference into this authorization. No additional county permit is required for this procession. He held the folder out toward Frey. He said the authorization code, the regulation, the route clearance, and the exemption language are all on the first 2 pages. I have read you the relevant section. Please read it yourself. Frey took the folder. He opened it. The morning was very still. The bird in the trees somewhere behind Miriam had gone silent. The engines of the procession idled but quietly. The 8 soldiers behind the hearse had not moved. Marcus stood beside his mother with his hands in his coat pockets and said nothing. Renee was still. Even the wind seemed to have decided to wait. Frey read the first page. He was thorough about it. She could see his eyes moved slowly, left to right, line by line, the posture of someone searching for the thing that makes it not say what it appears to say. Looking for the exception to the exception, the footnote that inverts the language, the detail that gives him a way to remain where he is. He did not find it. He turned to the second page. He found the exemption language. He read it. He read it again. Miriam watched the change move through him. Not all at once, not dramatically, but it moved visible if you were watching for it, the slight backward shift in his weight, the forward lean that had been present since the moment he first approached Marcus's window, losing its certainty by degrees, his posture finding a different position, more neutral, less assertive. He read the signature on the road clearance stamp. He read the date. Hopper did not say anything. He stood with his hands loosely clasped in front of him, and he watched Frey read with the complete patience of a man who already knows what the document says, has known what the document says since before they left the funeral home parking lot, and is simply waiting for the other man to arrive at the knowledge that he himself has been carrying all morning. He did not look satisfied. He did not look vindicated. He looked like a man waiting for something that needs to happen to happen. Miriam thought about October. She thought about the recliner and the afternoon light, and Leonard's voice walking her through the folds. She thought about how specific he had been, not just 8 folds, but the direction of the triangle, the visibility of the stripes. He had wanted her to be able to look at it and know it was right. He had not wanted there to be any ambiguity about whether it had been done correctly. She thought he prepared me. He spent 46 years preparing me for every hard thing, including this one. Not by shielding her from hard things, but by teaching her without ever making it feel like a lesson what it meant to stand in a difficult moment with your dignity intact. He had modeled it in his service. He had modeled it in the way he handled the diagnosis, the way he planned the end of his own life with the same methodical care he had brought to everything else. He had told her about the flag. He had told her about the straight rows. He had spent a life making sure the people he loved knew what they needed to know. She thought he taught me how to stand on a road and not be moved by someone who had confused authority with correctness. She thought he would have liked Dwayne Hopper. From along the perimeter fence line, moving on the gravel access path at the pace of someone with purpose, came the white golf cart. She heard it before she saw it, the hum of the electric motor, the crunch of gravel. Behind the wheel was a heavy-set man in a gray blazer and a collared shirt. The cemetery director, James Ewing, 61 years old, who pulled up onto the shoulder and climbed out and took in the stopped procession and the officer holding the army folder and Miriam on the center line and the 8 soldiers standing in the road in a single steady line. And his expression did not require any decoding. He said, "What is happening at my gate?" Frey said he had been verifying clearance documentation for the procession. Ewing said, "This is the Caldwell burial." Frey said, "Yes, sir." Ewing said, "I have coordinated this burial for 3 weeks. The Army authorization for this procession came to my office 10 days ago. The route clearance for the main entrance was confirmed in writing. The exemption from county permit requirements for military honors processions is established in the county agreement and has been for more than 20 years. Are you telling me you stopped this procession here?" Frey said there had been a question about the county escort clearance permit. Ewing said, "There is no question. There has been no question. The question you are describing does not exist for this procession. The exemption is established. Every deputy assigned to this corridor has received that briefing." He looked at the folder in Frey's hands. He said, "Is that the Army authorization?" Hopper said, "Yes, sir. Authorization code, Hotel, November 47, Delta 29. Ewing said, "I have that code in my files. It is the correct authorization for this procession. Officer Frey, is there any further question about this procession's authorization to enter through the main gate?" A pause. The morning light sat on everything. The white markers inside the cemetery fence were visible beyond the gate, still and straight. Frey stood with the folder and the knowledge in it, and the cemetery director and the honor guard sergeant and a widow in a dark navy dress, all looking at him, and he said, "No, sir." Ewing said, "Then please move your vehicle and clear the road." Hopper said, "Do you have any further questions regarding the clearance documentation, officer?" Frey said no. Hopper reached out and took the folder back. He held it in both hands for a moment, not reviewing it, just holding it. Then he closed it. The sound of it closing, a small, clean sound in the clear morning air, was the sound of something being finished. He said, "We have a 10 o'clock. He turned and walked back toward the honor guard line. Frey moved to his cruiser and got in and pulled it to the shoulder and stepped out and stood beside it. He did not look at the procession as it began to reform. No one spoke to him. No one looked at him except briefly and then away, not as a punishment or not only as a punishment, but because everything that had been focused on him had shifted forward toward what was ahead, toward what the morning had always been about. The honor guard separated from their single line into 2 parallel lines, 4 on each side of the road, standing at the edge of the shoulder facing inward toward the procession. The procession moved between them. Marcus pulled forward slowly. Miriam sat in the back seat with her purse in her lap and her hands still, and she looked out the windshield as they passed through the main entrance gate of Pinecrest National Cemetery, through the white stone columns, through the open wrought iron gate into the cemetery grounds, where the February morning light was falling across the white stone markers in straight rows that were exactly as straight as Leonard Jerome Caldwell had described them from a car window in the dark on a third date in 1978 to a 20-year-old woman who had thought, "I am going to marry this man." She had. She thought I kept it. I kept every single bit of it. The cemetery was beautiful in the morning light. She had not been here since a burial for someone else years ago, and she had forgotten how it looked up close, how the markers were set at identical intervals, how the grass between them was clipped and green even in February, how the whole space had the quality of something tended by people who understood that tending was a form of respect. Leonard had seen it from the road in the dark 48 years ago and said the rows were straight, and that he liked that. She could see now that the word straight had not been sufficient. The rows were not just straight. They were cared for, honored. He was going to rest here among people who had also served. He was going to be among his own. She held her purse. She did not speak. She let the car carry her into the grounds, and she looked at the rows and she breathed. The service was held at 10 o'clock on time as arranged. The morning was clear. The light was honest. The 8 soldiers of the honor guard moved through the ceremony with the precision and gravity that the occasion required, their movements carrying the accumulated weight of every military honors ceremony each of them had ever performed, all of it in service of this one. The rifle party fired 3 volleys. The sound of it moved out over the cemetery grounds and came back from the tree line. The bugler played taps. The notes moved through the clear air slowly with the patience of something that does not need to hurry because it knows what it is, and the sound of it went all the way through Miriam in a way she had prepared for, and that was still somehow more than preparation had accounted for. And then they folded the flag. She watched every fold. She did not look away. She counted without moving her lips. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The final triangle faced outward. She looked at the base of the fold. The red and the white were visible at the bottom of the triangle. The stripes, exactly what Leonard had told her to look for. It was right. Staff Sergeant Dwayne Hopper carried the flag to her. He knelt in front of her, both hands holding the folded triangle, and he looked up at her with the direct, respectful look of a man who understands the weight of what he is holding and who it is going to. He said, on behalf of the President of the United States Army, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service. She took it. She held it against her chest, against the dark navy of the dress Leonard had called his favorite. She was steady. After the service, James Ewing found her near the graveside. He stood beside her and spoke quietly. He said he was sorry for what had happened at the entrance gate. He said it should not have occurred, and it was not representative of how this cemetery received its people. He said he intended to make certain it was in the record correctly. She looked at him. She said, "Thank you for coming out when you did." He said, "I heard the radio traffic. When I understood what was happening, I came out directly." She said, "The letter you are going to write it clearly. Write everything you saw." He said, "I will. You have my word." She believed him. She had always been good at knowing when people meant what they said, and James Ewing meant it. She thanked him, and she turned back to her family, to Marcus and Renee, to Louise and Dwayne, to the congregation friends and the neighbors who had driven from 4 counties away to stand in the February morning at Pinecrest for a man who had served 26 years and come home to Georgia to die quietly and to be buried in the rows he had said were straight. The soldiers were completing their duties around them, moving with the same careful professionalism they had shown all morning. Dwayne Hopper was near the vehicle with 2 of the other soldiers, and she caught his eye, and he nodded to her, a small nod. The nod of a man who has done what he came to do and knows it was done right. She nodded back. That was enough. That was exactly enough. What followed happened in the days and weeks after. It happened in the way that consequential things often happen, not in a single moment, but through the accumulation of decisions made by people who understood that the record matters. Officer Dennis Frey returned to his station and wrote an incident report that described the morning's encounter as a civilian vehicle. Confusion situation resolved through documentation clarification. He wrote it in 6 paragraphs. He used the word resolved 4 times. He did not mention Staff Sergeant Hopper's Army authorization folder. He did not mention the cemetery director. He wrote that the situation had been addressed through standard procedure. He did not write the name Leonard Caldwell. James Ewing read the incident report. He had requested a copy through the county liaison office because he had decided at the gate that he was not going to be willing to have the record be decided by an account that was inaccurate. He read Frey's 6 paragraphs. Then he sat at his desk and he wrote a letter. 3 pages on Pinecrest National Cemetery stationery addressed to the Harlow County Sheriff's Department, the County Civilian Oversight Commission, and the Army Installation Coordinator who had issued the route authorization. In those 3 pages, he described in plain language everything he had witnessed at the main gate at 9:33 on a February morning, the stopped procession. The officer requesting a permit that the county agreement had specifically exempted military honors processions from for more than 20 years. The Army authorization folder that Staff Sergeant Hopper had presented, the authorization code that Ewing himself confirmed against his own office files, and what the officer had said and done before and after reading the documentation. He described arriving on the golf cart to find a widow standing on the centerline of Perimeter Road while her husband's hearse idled behind her. Every sentence was factual. Every fact was verifiable. The letter made no emotional arguments. It simply said what had happened in order by a person who had been there and who had decided that the record deserved accuracy. The letter arrived at the Sheriff's Department and was forwarded to Internal Affairs. There it was placed into a file. In that file were 2 prior complaints against Officer Dennis Frey. One from a black family in 2023, stopped on the way home from a Sunday church service, and one from an elderly black man in 2024, stopped returning from a hospital appointment. Both had been reviewed individually. Neither had resulted in formal action on its own because individually each had been assessed as an isolated incident insufficient for a finding of pattern. Together all 3 they were not assessed as isolated incidents. The pattern designation was entered into the file in the 3rd week following Leonard Caldwell's burial. It triggered a formal conduct review. The review produced a recommendation for reassignment pending further evaluation of Frey's conduct record. He was reassigned. The cemetery director's letter was incorporated into the formal record of the review as a primary supporting document. Not a footnote, a document. 3 pages of what had actually happened written by someone who had been present, who had not been willing to allow an inaccurate account to stand as the record simply because correcting it required effort. Miriam found out about the reassignment on a Thursday morning 3 weeks after the burial. She was in her own kitchen for the first time since Leonard had died, sitting at the rectangular table, the one he had chosen, because he wanted the rectangular one, and she had wanted the round one, and she had given him the rectangular one, and it was too big for the space, and she had never once told him she had been right with a cup of coffee in both hands, looking out the window at the backyard. Leonard's tools were under the porch overhang. He had always kept them there organized by type handles, wiped the way he kept anything he was responsible for. They were still there. Marcus called and told her. He told her about the reassignment and about the pattern designation and about the cemetery director's letter that had connected the 3 complaints into something that could not be set aside. He told her about the 2 prior complaints a family stopped after church in 2023. An elderly man stopped on his way from a hospital in 2024, and how each one alone had been assessed as insufficient for action, and how all 3 together with Ewing's letter, giving the 3rd one the specificity and the corroborating witness it needed, had been sufficient. She sat with the coffee cup in her hands and listened to all of it. When Marcus was done, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good. Marcus said the letter is what made it. Without it, the 2 prior complaints were not enough to constitute a pattern finding. Ewing putting it in writing is what did it." She said, "I know. That is how it works when somebody decides to write it down. When somebody who was there decides that what happened needs to be said clearly on paper so that the record is accurate, so that the truth of what happened has a document attached to it and not just a memory." She said, "I'm glad he wrote it. I'm glad it was 3 pages and not a paragraph." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Me too, Mama." She looked out the window at the tools under the overhang. She thought about Dwayne Hopper stepping forward from the line. She thought about him walking toward Frey without hurrying, without performing with the folder in his left hand, and the authorization code memorized, and the regulation number memorized because he had prepared, because he had shown up for this assignment with everything he needed to do it correctly the way Leonard would have prepared, the way Leonard always had. She thought about the folder closing, the small sound of it in the morning quiet. "We have a 10 o'clock, just that." As though the only thing remaining was to proceed to what had always been the purpose of the morning. She set the coffee cup down. She thought about Leonard in the recliner in October, walking her through the folds, patient and specific, trusting her to hold what he told her. She thought about the 3rd date in 1978, the dark road, the cemetery fence, a 22-year-old man saying he hoped to rest there someday, and a 20-year-old woman thinking without any doubt, "I am going to marry this man." She had married him. She had held his hand through 46 years, and she had been there at the end, and she had worn his favorite dress to his funeral, and she had stood on a road in the morning light, and she had not moved, and she had not raised her voice, and she had kept everything he had given her to keep. The flag was on the shelf above the fireplace. She had placed it there the evening she came home before she unpacked her bag. She had held it for a moment, feeling the weight of the folded cloth, and then she had set it on the shelf, and she had looked at it. The triangle faced outward. She checked the base of the fold. The red and the white were visible. The stripes exactly as he had described. It was right. 8 folds, exactly right. She had remembered every word. This is what dignity looks like when it is not a performance but a practice. When a woman has spent 46 years building it and arrives at the hardest morning of her life with it intact and stands on a road and does not move and does not raise her voice once during the entire encounter and does not give anyone anything except the fact of her presence and the fact of her husband's name. His name was Leonard. Not the remains. Leonard. This is what it looks like when preparation meets a moment that needs it. A man who requested a specific assignment, who drove to a funeral home parking lot before dawn, who carried a specific folder with the authorization already confirmed, who memorized a specific code and a specific regulation. Not because he was showing off, but because he came ready, because Leonard Caldwell deserved someone who came ready, who walked forward without drama when the moment required it and read from memory because he had done the work. This is what it looks like when the record is made accurate, when someone with authority and knowledge and presence decides that what happened deserves to be documented, and writes 3 pages of clear factual truth and sends them where they need to go because truth written down has a different weight than truth that only lives in memory, and because the people affected by what happened deserved to have the record be accurate. And this is what it looks like when 3 things that were each not quite enough become together. Exactly enough when the pattern becomes visible, because someone was willing to trace it, when accountability becomes possible, because one witness was willing to write 3 pages and sign them. Leonard Jerome Caldwell is buried at Pinecrest National Cemetery in Harlow County, Georgia. The rows are straight exactly as he described them on a third date in 1978 from a car window in the dark. His wife stood at his grave on a clear February morning in his favorite dress. His son and daughter stood beside her. 8 soldiers who had prepared and who had showed up stood in 2 lines on either side of the road, and the procession moved through them in silence. The flag is on the shelf. The triangle faces outward. The stripes are visible at the base. If this story moved something in you, if you found something in it that reminded you of someone who served, someone who stood firm, someone who deserved to be received with the full care and honor that Leonard Caldwell was received with on that Friday morning, then do this one thing: subscribe our channel. Because we are going to keep telling stories like this one. Stories about women who stand on roads in their best dresses and do not move and do not raise their voices and do not give any ground. About soldiers who carry folders and read regulations from memory because they prepared. About families who made it through the hardest mornings of their lives with their dignity not just intact, but entirely demonstrably unquestioned. About cemetery directors who write 3-page letters because the record matters. These stories deserve to be told. We are here to tell them, every single one. His name was Leonard. His wife stood on a road in his favorite dress and held his name in her mouth the way she held everything he gave her carefully without letting go. She remembered every fold of the flag. She verified each one. The rows at Pinecrest are straight, just as he said they would be from a car window in the dark on a third date when he was 22 years old and had already decided what kind of man he was going to be. He was not wrong about that. He was not wrong about much.